We back.
Yes, sir.
The boys are back in town.
Another episode.
Another one.
Calculated conversation. Welcome back.
Yes.
I'm David Jefferson.
I'm Ken Jones.
We are the Calculated Conversation talk show.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to touch on a few more things. It's the summertime.
Yes.
So we're a little bit spicy in here, but we're going to get it done.
It is the longest day to this. The longest sunset. Was the longest day of the year today.
I think so, yeah. Sun beat down my baseball hat.
I'm glad that the temperatures ain't rising too much yet, but I am glad to get that sunshine and getting that feeling of wanting to be up and moving around the right way.
That's right, man. And we definitely want to say thank you for anybody that's been paying attention, anybody that's shared anything. We've been peeping the shares on Instagram, Facebook, and we are grateful. That's a lot of love there, and we plan on building a super dope platform. Super dope calculated team, including all y'all.
All of y'all.
So we can further the message and, just keep building.
And talk back with us. That's what it's for.
Right.
If there's something that happened to strike a nerve or, inspire a thought, share it with us. Throw that in the comments, send a DM or whatever. You got a question, anything like that, throw it in. Or you got just some additional information that we can add into the context of the conversation that we share with y'all. Because, again, y'all are a part of this.
Right, that part. So if you guys paid attention to last week or you saw the show, or if you hadn't, please go back. But we definitely touched on a lot about value systems. We kind of broke down a little bit of the science of, what value systems are, what are some healthy ones, what are some unhealthy ones, how are they created. It's a good segment to go back and just sort of refresh if you've seen it.
Yeah.
And if you hadn't seen it, just go see it for the first time. And we talked a bit about boundaries. So we're going to go through a whole sequence, of self-definition and living life on one's own terms.
Yes. And also I want to say to find that full-length conversation on YouTube. It's Calculated Conversation. You'll find it on there. Also in that description, you will see some questions that are there that we're asking y'all to share with us. So if you happen to come across those, go ahead and respond to them.
Right. Fair enough. So this week, I know my man Cam been processing some things, and we're going to go a little bit deeper. And it's sort of the next phase from the last conversation. We're going to try to continue it down the sequence so it all kind of add up and make sense, and we don't just scatter you and throw things in different weeks.
Yes. One of the things I do want to share with y'all to open this up, because me and bro was having a conversation, and, it was a Nip lyric that came up because, we were talking and the conversation was around success and how, how do you figure out what success means to you as an individual? Right. And bro kind of told me, like, pump the brakes right quick, because before we can even get to that portion, there's a lot more that needs to get discussed on the way to that. And I'm like, yes, you are completely right. Mm-hmm. And then the conversation went into a lyric of Nip's, and it really had to do with the idea of, yes, there's this higher level that we're all trying to get to, a higher version of ourselves and be at peace and all of that. But we have to take a look and really think about the physiological portion of that, the psychological portion of getting there, and how when a lot of us are in this state of survival mode, trying to think about the greater good is not always forefront or anywhere in the mind. And that time is figuring what's needed right now. And so with that, I do want to start with the lyric that we happen to be talking about. I'm going to share that for those of y'all that are familiar. I'm sure a lot of y'all are. But in a sit-down talk that Nip was having, he had shared this. I just pulled this little excerpt. But he said, what you got to think about is what you don't have. You're in survival mode. So being in survival mode automatically rules out a lot of things, because you don't experience morality, because you experience the need to survive.
Right.
And, in that conversation, that then made me think about another lyric, or not lyric, but another, actually an excerpt from a movie, Snow on the Bluff. And man's was like, there's not a right way, there's not a wrong way, there's a need way. There's a way that things need to be done, and that's how I do them. And essentially, this was a person that was in full survival mode in his environment, in the situation that he was in. It wasn't the luxury of thinking about what's next. And that always sat with me and kind of tied in to all of this conversation that's about to happen right now. So just giving y'all the where this conversation kind of stemmed from and how we got to here right now.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely, again, it's a sequence. We want to talk about, definition of success, how that's done, what's a proper way to do it, what's a healthy way. But oftentimes, I think it's a good point to take note of where our current definitions come from and how are they created, who builds those for us, or do we build them for ourselves based on something else?
Yeah.
And so if we can start to understand how they're built in the first place, I think we have a greater chance, of unraveling that and then rebuilding it from a more, productive standpoint, or just replacing the things that need to be replaced.
Yeah.
And holding on to the things that need to be held on to, because I don't think every single value needs to be done away with. It just needs to be reevaluated to see what's still working for you and what's outdated. Right. And so this survival mode thing, I think, is powerful because it gets into deeper context of, what are we faced with that's playing a huge role in how our systems are created and what rules we decide to live by. You know what I mean? And is that survival mode or could it be, the next step up, which is out of survival mode, just in live mode. Yes. You know what I mean? Like,
And that's like, and of course, y'all know I be preaching, write in the journal, keeping notes of, you see me referencing, because I, be dropping a little stuff to be able to run back to. But kind of defining the whole idea of survival mode. And it's like a mental and physical state that you're in, and it's usually based off a perceived threat, even if that may not be something that's a reality. It's the idea that there is a threat around me that is kind of looming around. And, we talk about the different type of, trauma responses, and I do air quote trauma. I know trauma is a real thing, but I also feel like that's one of those things that have been utilized in so much. But there's our responses to situations and scenarios where, we all know the fight or flight, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where either when something comes and you get charged up, you go towards the danger, or flight, you run away from it. Then there's freeze, people who just stop, right? And then there's another one that I wasn't familiar with till more recently called fawn, which is the idea of like you essentially submit and try to be as nice as possible to not get any, so that there's no kickback, so that you're like in a good state to not trigger anything.
Right.
So that's an interesting one of getting added to that tree. And, each of those states you can go through a cycle of those and kind of end up in this loop. And I think about the idea of being in this perpetual state of survival, to where you're not thinking long term, because it doesn't allow you to think. It's survival. So it's going into these things that are more instinctual. These are your baselines. And then that goes into what bro had just said about these values and so on, that we don't even know why we have them, why they're there. So it's certain things that have been put in us since before we knew what was being done. And that goes back to, our family situation from birth on up. And understanding that when you get into these loops, sometimes you're not able to even recognize where some of this stuff stems from, of why you deal with conflict in the way that you deal with conflict. Sometimes it is a little easier to recognize, but once you start unpacking and really asking the whys and continuing to ask the why of yourself, right? Because it's one thing to have a conversation with a person, right? And you may not want to share everything,
right?
Versus with yourself, trying to unpack, you would want to be able to do that, but I also understand why people don't, because that opens up a lot of things that may have been pushed back on purpose, right? But with that, it's holding on to that. There's this element, this thing I was reading, this article I was reading, and one of the things that they touched on was about how, like, high anxiety people who also are not confrontational, it's just inside building. And they may be angry a lot, but they are scared of conflict or avoid conflict. Right. So it's just constantly inside, and how the rates of like heart disease, heart attacks, these different pulmonary issues cardiac issues based off that stress and so on that's constantly going inside. And all that ties back to that state of being in survival mode, because it's your response and your reaction, and some of it very real, some of it only up here. And I think there's, you know, quite a few people who get caught in the state of inaction because of this. You can't see too far out. You're just thinking right here. So it's constantly this state of, I just, and usually those people tend to seem like they're not motivated. They tend to be tired more often, don't really have interest in many things. And it's legitimately because the brain is like fizzing out, too much on alert all the time. And of course, this can show up in other ways. This can be, you know, burnout from a job. This can be, you know, certain social interactions on down to abuse and some other things that, you know, put you in that space. But if you've always been in this space of, you know, food is not something that you're guaranteed. Right. Housing, shelter. Right. Knowing where you're going to use all this stuff hasn't been guaranteed to you throughout your life. Right. It's a whole lot harder to relax. Right. And to think that, oh, moving forward, things will be good. Right. That's not how the brain retains, right? Because it is built and designed in order to keep you alive. So as you're building these patterns that you built in order to survive, that's what your brain is going to keep feeding into. So everything that's a cue that seems like it's going to, then it's like, oh no, if we had to move every 6 months, I can guarantee you get itchy around every 6 months. Right. You start feeling like, oh, like what's about to happen? What's about to happen? And I think there's also a part to that that plays in that same loop is the expectation of bad to happen. Right. The expectation that things are going to go left. And it's interesting how often we don't have conversations about expecting things to go right. Right. Something I heard the other day that like, whew, like that's a bar. It was like, why when people talk about the things that shaped them in life, the things that made them who they are, they never bring up the good things that happen. It's typically triumphed and I had to persevere and all of that. And it's like there's a lot of pieces that shape us, but typically the thing that stands out is going to be because those are where your brain locks in. I had to survive this. Or I had to be on that extra alert. My senses were in a different place. Right. When you're happy, your senses are relaxed. You're just,
You might forget about the things that made you happy.
But the things that hurt you, a lot of times that's going to be there.
Yeah, they have more impact.
Way more impact.
Yeah, definitely. You know, and I think that survival mode, hearing you talk, man, I start thinking about like animal instinct, you know what I mean? And I think that's about as close as we get to that instinct, you know, where we're not really concerned about anybody's well-being, sometimes not our own well-being, right? Because animals get killed trying to eat. They don't feel for anybody's family. They don't feel when, you know, when another mother loses a cub or something, like they like, I need to eat or I'm not going to be able to stay alive.
Except for elephants. Elephants be beefing.
Yeah, except elephants. But
and maybe dolphins.
But, you know, and I think it's kind of on the same accord with that. Yeah. You know, and survival mode is just something that, you know, I think it's so just webbed into our conscience that we don't even know that we're in that mode. You know, and so we got to look at how we know we're in survival mode. What is survival mode? What is thriving mode? Yeah. How do we make the transfer over? You know, and how long does survival mode supposed to last? You know what I mean? Because some people do it for the entire life.
Yes.
Then some people, you know, kind of unwrap the things that put them in that space, and they start to thrive. And so. You know, I just, you know, my personal feelings is, and I like what you also said about people talking about the things that make them who they are, the good parts, because I always purposely make sure that I tell people that, man, I think having a good mother saved my life. Yeah. You know, I know that I grew up in the streets and I know I was in survival mode a lot of the times, but I also know that I had a good mother with a good heart that definitely taught me how to love. Yeah. And so I make sure I throw that in there, especially when I'm, mentoring young boys and their moms don't really know exactly what to do when their kid is in survival mode, right? Because they feel like their hands are tied. And I'm like, nah, just continue to show them what it's like to be loved.
Yeah.
They might not get it at this moment, but I've known men to go back to it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Once they get out of survival mode, which was happened to me.
Yeah.
Once I got out of survival mode, I went back and found the love my mother taught me, and I built my life based off of that.
Yes. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that was the most powerful thing. And some people never, ever had that.
Yeah.
And so definitely, how do you even create any love in your life if you've never seen it, and you like have a lack of love will put you in survival mode. It will keep you there.
Like that is a great thing to bring up, because like I'm a somebody that can stand on the idea, like when the way you talk about your mother, right? And I think about people in my life who have had like the mom, right? And that's not my experience.
Right.
And I see that and I'm like, there's something unique. Don't get me wrong, I got my dad, right? Dad's love is awesome. Right. There's something about seeing a mom be a mother, right? And that's an element where going into people who don't, like people who, lost their parents, maybe young, or just, were in the system, whatever, just never really experienced that type of connection of how trying to seek that in the ways in which trying to find that and confusing. And it's not necessarily a thing that can just be taught, right? Because there's not here's how to love. Right. This is a feeling, and more than just love, because you can love things, right? You can love stuff. You can really enjoy things and confuse that with love. There's a lot of layers to that. And that idea of, I think the mother's or parents' love, that can be grandma and whatever. It can come down to, it's that feeling of unconditional and not unconditional in a way I can just do whatever and, but that person is for you. If the world is against you, that person is for you. And there's a lot of people who do not get to experience that, or got to only experience that for a period in time. And then it's almost this continuous trying to chase and find that feeling again. And that can, especially that happening young, of how that can kind of dictate the path. Right. That's why, when I come across just genuinely good people, I make sure to tell them, like, you are a good person. Not just I like you or you're cool. You are a good human. Right. And I make sure to use that phrase. And it's not there's no like segmenting it. You are a good human. And there's just people that operate from that space. Right. And I'm always like that, more of that. But again, they've managed to get to a place and a level of understanding that, regardless of what the world throws, right? Because we all go through the loops. Right. But there are just some people that something was put into them. And I can't even say always put in, by poured into them a certain way. Sometimes it is lack of why they overshow, right? To create the love, or to make sure that somebody else is able to experience what they did not. But there is a set of people who they have no idea. Right. And moving through, it's like, that's coupled with the idea of survival mode, right? You don't have the love portion. Right. Even on your base level needs, those are always in flux. It's like, where is the conversation? How do you have a conversation with a person at that space? Right. About how they need to do things to center themselves. Yeah, right. You know what I mean? Right. And that's just for the listener, this is like what kind of the bigger idea here is, and why we're getting into this is just that these levels that we want to get to, trying to start at this base level and see where some of the conflict can lie. And yes, there is something, because I'm a full believer, as a fully grown person, there are some things that you have to stand up for yourself. Once you recognize certain patterns in yourself, that you have to kind of stand up to and look at yourself and start doing the work on that to try to figure those things out. So I do feel that is, a starting point. But that load can be heavy. And, there's people out here working 2-3 jobs just to keep the lights on, if that, but to keep a roof over their head, trying to keep food. So the time to be able to sit down and read a book, the time to be able to sit and watch some self-help things, or even to be able to schedule therapy. The idea, we love pushing that. And yes, for the people that have that ability and that access, yes. Also, there are certain freedoms that you have to be able to even do that, to be able to get to that point.
Right.
And if it's a person that only gets, they're off between 11 p.m. and got to be back at 6 in the morning, where's that therapy going to be? And you might say the telephone, but those people still have to get that sleep in. They've got it. So it's just a lot that can go in this, and understanding that when we're dealing with people, we're not all playing from this even playing field. And that's why, understanding the idea of meeting people where they're at.
Yeah.
And doesn't necessarily mean that you can lift everybody to whatever space, but you meet people where they are at and understand that, most of us are just, whether it's a couple paychecks, it's a trip and fall, whatever, away from being in a situation where these things that keep us feeling secure can be removed and thrown in that loop. You remember back when we were doing the show over there and we were talking about, the idea of becoming homeless, right? We talk about mental health and the idea of how we look, drive through downtown, it's like, oh, that person's having an episode. They definitely had, it's like that person may not have ended up there based on these episodes. That person could have lost a job, couldn't pay a rent, slept in a car got towed. Now you're on the streets. If you've never lived on the street, most likely you're not going to have a comfortable time going to sleep outside.
Right.
So in your survival mode, because now all of your antennas are up, you're going to be staying awake as long as you possibly can.
Right.
The body can only keep operating for so long.
Right.
You take a nap, wake up, your bag's gone. The little bit of belonging that you had left, they're out of there.
Right.
You go looking for help, asking, I just want to wash my face, and people are telling you no, they're looking at you weird. You've been in these same clothes for this long. It starts compounding, and all those ideas that you had, this idea of who you are starts getting shredded away because you're being treated less and less and less than.
Right.
And that can send a person over that edge. A lot of us are not far away from that being a possible reality. And as we've talked about, especially if you're a man, there's not services like that out there if you happen to, fall down in this marathon of life. And so that's like a conversation that always stuck with me, when we were having that. I don't remember the gentleman that we had that was our guest on that episode, but, he kind of went into that conversation with us, and that's always echoed around. So again, going back to, you don't have the basics.
Right.
And just what state that puts you in. And so now we've highlighted that area. I wanted to make sure to highlight that we do understand that exists. And that's kind of why having that part of the conversation. But now going into the space where your basic needs, for the most part, they're good. And you're at the space of trying to actually work towards your higher self. I think that helps us get into the conversation around kind of recognizing what's going on, what those patterns, those values that have been instilled that you maybe didn't want, and they're not serving you, and how to, detect those, along with starting to look at ways that you can kind of counter some of that survival mode and trying to recognize that it's happening for one, and then some of the actions that can be taken to try to get yourself into thrive mode.
Right. Now, I definitely, that's definitely a great segue. We do, again, understand the importance of surviving. We had to survive at some points in our lives. And so we trying to come from a full picture aspect to see everything. But so it wouldn't be fair to not address, like that. We know there are people that are, barely making it enough to have to try to think right and act right, make the best decisions and calculate. But, again, like bro said, when you get into a space and now you're living, you got your basic needs. Now we're trying to figure out, well, how do we thrive, right? Thrival mode.
Thrival mode.
I know what I like to always think about, like I'm very, very clear on the moment that I got into thrival mode. I remember everything that I was doing. I remember how I did it.
That.
Yeah, I remember the exact moment, when I started thriving. And if you guys have been paying attention to any of our other shows, you'll remember that I always talk about the spirit, right? I always talk about getting to know yourself, like operating from a different space. When you're in survival mode, right, we operating from the spaces of typically our environment.
Yes.
Right, where we are. We have to do these things to live here in our mind, right? Once you get out of that environment, though, and some people get out of that environment, but they still think like they're in it, right? And so I like to start with looking at impact of my previous value system in survival mode. I want to look at it. I want to study it, right? And that was my journey, looking and studying and breaking down my experiences in those modes, and basically laying it all out. And so what I think is that I think we go through these experiences, and I don't think that people process how they feel about them enough. I think you got to go deeper into how these things made you feel. One thing I always notice in society is that people typically don't like the impact of certain decisions, but they don't dislike the impact enough to change the decision, is what I see. And so then you get this process when they start saying, okay, he might be a little insane.
Yeah.
Right. So I started by looking at my experiences, and I decided that I hated them. I consciously decided that I don't like the way these things make me feel, and I never want to feel that way again. So the real question is, when do we get to a point to where we don't want to ever feel like this again?
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't ever want to go through this again.
Yeah.
And we're going to completely undo the value system that put us in that position, so there's no chance.
Yeah.
Not do it easier, not do it slicker, but so there's no chance.
Yeah.
And that was my journey. And in looking at that, it forced me to take a lot of things out of my value system. I had to take out being accepted or being liked.
Yeah.
I had to take out fear, right? I had to take out comfort.
Yeah.
Doing what was easy. I had to take all those things out just to make room to put things in there that I didn't know would even work.
Yeah.
So I like to say that I didn't know what was going to work, but I knew exactly what was not going to work, which caused me to take chances, to try new things, to create the wisdom to help me build a new formula. And that was kind of my process. So I started with the things that I hated and the things that I never want to feel again.
Yeah.
And so that made it easier for me.
Yeah.
I think people need to do that. I think they need to look at their experiences and decide, I'm never going to feel this way again, and I'm going to make sure of it.
Yeah.
We don't do that enough.
1000%.
We get mad. We get on social media and whine about it.
Yeah.
We hate it. We say never again, but we don't completely take it out of our formula.
Yeah.
So it comes back. So according to the universe, it don't look like we have a real problem with it. We just saying we do. So it's a matter of putting your words and your actions in a parallel motion so that it makes sense to you, to God, to the universe, to whatever it needs to make sense to, to know that this is no longer your space. It's a tough decision.
Yeah.
Because now what happens is you have to try new things, because now I can never do this again, So now I have to try new things. I don't know if these things are going to work, but I'm going to take a chance because I want something different. And also getting out of survival mode and changing your value system to yourself, you're saying, I know that it can be better than this.
Yeah.
One thing we don't say enough is that I know it can be better. I know it gets better. people ask me for advice all the time, and I'm trying to guide them through it, and I'm trying to get them to understand, why are you so comfortable here in the first place? Why are you still here?
Yeah.
Very often I've heard, well, I think this is as good as it's going to get. And when I hear that, I know that it's a wrap for you, because if you can't visualize that something better exists, then you won't recognize it when you see it. And that's something that I've been holding on to, these formulas, as I've been trying to create my life and trying to thrive. And I honestly believe, and I feel like I'm thriving now. I'm in that mode, and I would not have been able to do it if I didn't put a brick wall against the things that put me and kept me in survival mode.
Yeah.
So I forced myself, I put my back against the wall to try new things. And that's how I was able to get as wise as I am, and why I continue to get wiser, and these doors keep opening up, because now for me to take a risk, it's normal for me. It's nothing. I don't fear risk at all anymore. And so that was the beginning. And so I had to start to look at myself. So when you don't have that love, right, from your parents, I did have it myself, but if you don't have that love from your mom or your dad or anybody, you gotta strengthen your connection with your God, or whatever it is you believe in, and you guys gotta build a new love that way.
Yeah.
And that new love, it can help guide you towards things that you care about. Maybe you didn't know this before. Maybe you didn't even look at it this way.
Yeah.
But it's going to guide you towards things that you care about. And as you start to realize you do care about things, these things make you feel good. You may have not been able to look at these things because you were in survival mode. These things may have always been there.
Yeah.
You may have been born with these things, but you were in survival mode, so you could not acknowledge these things. And now that you're out of it, you can be led back to the love. Even if you've never seen it before, it can be brought out and it can be exposed. And you can build your life just off that little piece of love.
Yeah.
And I think learn how to love other things and other people.
It's tight, because the way that, we're sequencing through this conversation just naturally, and I didn't even mention it here yet on with y'all, but thinking of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that foundational, that being your physiological joints, and then getting into safety.
Right.
And then from there, it's love and belonging. And then you can get into self-esteem.
Boom.
And then the final form is the self-actualization. That's when it's really about like the selflessness. That's where it's being able to operate without prejudice, like just being able to see things at a higher level.
Right.
Get into that love and belonging phase where once you do have community, that's why community is so important in different ways. It doesn't mean, you have to be a man of the community. Community could mean your bingo friends. It could mean the people you go and, meet every Thursday and play pool with, just a group that you can interface and go back and forth with. Understanding once that's there and you get to have some semblance of how people care for you, how you care for people, and you start to understand that, as you said, figuring out what is important, because I think what you said about having to look, to your God or whatever, and sometimes it is even looking to self of like, because once you love you, then you can operate and to be able to love other people. So if it is having to love yourself first and figuring out how to do that, because once you do that and you get to a point where you can say, I love myself, I love how I treat myself, that then sets up the boundaries for how you'll allow people to treat you and so on. And that's a hell of a process. But the idea of getting to that point, boundaries almost set themselves. You know what I mean? Like that's the better way to put it. They will start setting themselves, because there's things that you take in, just the way that, someone doesn't eat meat. It's like, that's not going to be something that they're processing through their body. So they're probably not going to be a fan of serving you. Right. Or they're not just going to take a bite just to see how it tastes. Like, no, this is what I do. So I think that next part after that love is it's working on with figuring out that community. It is the self-esteem part. And that's a big one.
Yeah.
Right. Confidence. All of us have areas that, we wish we were stronger in. There's areas, there's just things that wish we could be better at. And then there's these self-defeating thoughts that run through our head, right? There's a lot of people outwardly great, but that self-talk be wild. And I think about when you were just saying about some people saying, I don't see it being better than this.
Yeah.
And one of the crazy things, since I was a child, it's been a thing of, I know it gets better.
Yeah.
Like legitimately, that's a thing that I have. This isn't how life is supposed to be for me. Like I've thought that so many times since a child. And I feel like, you know, it's a running joke with my family of I always figure it out and land on my feet. Yeah. Like no matter what life is thrown at me, being able to figure that out. And I think because in my head, it's always, this is just a part. The progress is going to keep happening. This is just a moment. Here, I'm in this moment. Yeah, I'm sad for the moment. I'm mad for the moment. Cool. There's still things that got to get done.
Right.
And moving past that. That undying belief in the back of my head is, I think, what keeps putting me in position and it's kept me in certain rooms, have given me the ability to connect with people who are in motion also.
Right.
Based on that.
Right.
Now, with that said, yes, I've gone through the psychological like traps that I've set for myself of telling myself in moments of, oh, why that thing probably isn't for me, right? I've done that type of stuff in terms of limiting myself many times. And then when getting a bit older, and I'll say specifically like when we were doing the show the first time, because of how much, you know, writing I was doing at the time and really unpacking of a lot of things and these different topics of realizing that overall people don't be paying attention to you and they don't care. Like, just frankly, right? And so a lot of the things that get our nerves up is because of how people will view us or what we think they'll think.
What they think.
Right? And how that limits. And then you see some people who are just bold. There was actually a little young dude doing door-to-door sales, knocked on my door the other day to try to sell, like, saying that the bugs and stuff are coming because the sun's out now. And everything in his posture, like immediately I was like, oh, like, you're good. Because you're doing the conversation things to get me talking, even though you can tell I want to close this door. Right. You're doing the things, and I'm recognizing it, and wanting to see kind of where we're going. And as I'm watching him talk and doing the actual things of making sure to not talk about what you're selling, first you get them warmed up with things that they care about, right? And so, oh, I see you got the whoops on, you got shoes. I see the mat saying doing all that, right? And as I'm going, though, there was a certain level of confidence that, like, oh, this is somebody that would talk to whoever, wherever. There's not this stance that kind of gives when people have the sunk in shoulders and the and it was a way in which he was coming across. And I remember being like, yeah, he's going to be able to maneuver in life. Yeah. There's a confidence that you have right here, right now, just trying to, and none of you're not reading from a script. You're not like none of that. Okay. And what that made me think about, again, going into the space of confidence and how those type of people that have that certain confidence young, they're typically the bold. And I've said this on this platform and I'll say it again, life is lived by the bold. Right. It's the people willing to take the chance. When you said you had to eliminate that fear, right? Yeah. It's risk. Yeah. I am going towards the risk. Right. Not running from it, not risk averse. Like, I am risk forward. And so that type of mentality is how life gets lived, because it's the person who asks versus the person that's like, oh, no, they would never. Most times they will if you just ask, right? Of course, some people use that in the worst ways of like customer service people, but in general, there is something to understanding that people are not paying that much attention to you. And a majority of what you do, unless you're doing something wild, you're passing them in a moment. Right. And they've got a whole life that they're living and thinking about, and you won't be thought of 10 minutes later in most portions. So taking that chance, standing up in front of that group, talking. You don't feel what's going on in this space, speak up. Say something about it. Right. You may be the only one that has it in that moment to get up and speak. And yeah, people in there may be thinking, I always say that people, majority of the time, there's one or two people who are thinking exactly what you're thinking. And if nobody says it, because most people are going to go with what the majority has said, but typically everything that's happened that's been probably good, it's by the people who looked at that objectionably and got up and were like, no, actually, versus just saying, oh, yeah, I guess that's what we'll do, just because they're not wanting to create any of those ripples. And I think that's something with getting into that space of self-esteem. getting into that space of not being afraid of conflict, and not beat my chest conflict, meaning people not agreeing with your take, with your view, with the way that you're going about something. And that's where that self-esteem, a lot of times we take that as a level of cockiness. Now, I do think there's a level of, there's confidence and then there's cockiness. Some people can't tell the difference, right? But one of them is coming from a core place. One of them is, I'm trying to prove something. And sometimes to the untrained eye, those can seem very similar. But there's a difference when a person is confident in their ability and they're sharing with you their ability. They're sharing with you, not in a way that, kind of, no, this is who I am. This is what I do. That comes off, depending on who is on the receiving end of that, a certain type of way. But there's a lot of pride in that when you do have that self-esteem, because once you have self-esteem, you can start transferring that to the people around you that interact with you.
Absolutely.
And that's where we get into the idea of energy transfer. Like, that stuff actually matters. And if it's real, then that's what it's going to hopefully invoke in the people around that are open to that. Now, if it's a false confidence and it's just, that is going to also transfer and it's going to get shaky around you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, just get into that space of, that when you do get to that space of that self-esteem and then your ability to respect yourself and then be able to respect others, that then gets you to this space of, now it's like, okay, how do I take this further? And that's where I think people get into that. I found my calling.
Yeah.
I found what I was put here to do. I feel like that's where that level, when you get to there, it's like, got it. And you know it. Not, I think this is, or have this belief, but you know. And so there being that moment where you just were speaking to, I knew the moment. It's like that's it.
Yeah, definitely.
That's it.
Definitely, man. With the cocky and confident thing, I think that I definitely think cocky is designed, to bring people down, and confidence is designed to lift people up. And cockiness, I think, have a deep rooted insecurity of not being good enough. Whereas confident people know they're good enough, so they'll mind if you're good too. Because they are in alignment with their true spirit, and so, and that's important as far as.
And let me add to that. They also know that they are okay with not being good at a thing. And they're okay with that because they're still going to try the thing. So because that's another, that level of confidence that I was thinking, like, some people cannot sing, but they be. So,
and if you're better at a thing than they are, and then they have no problem, following you down that road, they don't need to be the leader if they know they're not the best at it. They just want to get it done right. But then again, so that confidence level, my bro's talking about, I think is, definitely a culmination of, faith, spirituality, and also that authenticity. And I told you kind of where it started at, especially for me. It started with unraveling the things that I didn't want anymore, and having to be in a space to where I was trying the things I did want because I was fearless, and I just felt like it gets better, right? And the cool thing, and you don't get that confidence, right, unless you operate from an authentic space. It's hard to be confident, truly confident, when you don't know what space you're in, right? And so this is, I think, the sequence, where you come from unlearning, then you get into redefining, and then you get into an authentic space, and then you can boldly and loudly speak your peace and speak your presence and stand on your principles because it's truly you. So if people are going against it, that's fine because it doesn't waver in your mind. And if they go against it, they might just not understand. It don't mean that they don't like you or that you're wrong. They might just not understand because it's not them, it's you. Right? And these are the people that you remember. Like you said, the people that stand up, the people that what we call disruptors. They change a lot of narratives. And when you check your history books, these are the only people that you remember. These are the only ones that they write about. These are the ones that they name your school after or your organization or building after. These are the people that made people, that encourage people to see things differently. you know, whether everybody took it in or not.
Right.
But they created a formula, and they put out new philosophies that allow people to see the world in other ways. And those ways worked for a lot of people.
And the crazy thing is that it's often not in the moment when those people are standing up,
right,
that it's understood, nor is it adopted in the mass sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things about being a leader, right?
Right.
Being out in front and being okay with being in front or in the back, right? You can lead from the back, lead from the front, but in leading from the front, sometimes it's you having to take that first step.
Right.
You don't know if that bridge is going to snap or not, but taking the time to actually like understand if you're doing it for the right reason and you're doing it for the greater good of us, of the people, then it shouldn't only be done if it's going to benefit you.
Right.
And that's where those disruptors and those people that stood up, it was bigger than just them.
Right.
It was bigger than the idea of that moment. It was about what they saw as being right for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
That's typically what the story will look like and read in these books and these stories that get passed down through the generations of those people who stood out and took the chance.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, and as you rise through those, you know, those realizations and those levels of growth, I think you'll be led towards this calling.
Yeah.
I mean, we always talk about the fact that you don't really get to choose your calling. It has to choose you. You know, it's not a conscious choice for us. It's an assignment, you know, that we receive from our higher ups, you know, and having a way of communicating, and even more importantly, a way of listening to that is the key. And how you listen to that is when you start listening to yourself, and you start listening to your gut, to your spirit, to the things that are guiding you. So with that being said, I knew that I couldn't do anything that I'd done before. I knew I had to do something new. Basically, I was told by, you know, my spirit that whatever you do, it needs to be something that you love. That's the one thing that I remember hearing. It needs to be something that you love. I didn't really understand why at the time.
Yeah.
So I went into this space to start thinking about what did I love. Again, we back at love.
Yeah.
I started with love. And the first thing that came to my mind was like, well, you love shoes and clothes. I'm like, shoes and clothes? Like, okay, like, what do you do with that? I don't know. You figure it out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will spend my very last $1,000 that I have to my name on some shirts. I'm going to throw them in my trunk, and I'm going to try to sell them.
Yeah.
And that's what I did.
Yeah.
And that started my whole journey and changed my entire life.
Yes, Lord. Yes.
And that is a true story. You know, I did not want to spend that money. I did not. I wanted to be fearful. I wanted to like, no, that's all I got.
Yeah.
But it was at my job too. It was at my job, like right before I quit.
Yeah.
I got up and I walked away from the computer. I was like, I can't do this. This is all I got.
Yeah.
And I heard some words that I know verbatim in my head that I never ever forgot, that I was told by my spirit. It said, if you don't do it now, when will you do it?
Yeah.
That's what I heard. And I was like, oh, if I don't do it now, I'm never doing it, man. So I went back and hit the button, man, ordered the shirts, bro. And then like my life really ain't been the same since. You know, that's real talk, you know. And that's where I lost all my fear.
Yeah.
And now I'm able to get into my space. You know, I didn't want to be a speaker. I didn't want to do any of those things, but it's like, now I got no fear. And God is like, well, hey, I need you to speak.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I don't speak. I'm an introvert.
Right.
I need you to speak, you know, and I just started doing what I was told, bro.
Yeah.
Obedience, you know, has been the key, you know, and it all started just from me unraveling things, knowing what I couldn't do, not knowing what was going to work, but trying things that was based off of my truth and my authenticity and my love. And it just started with shoes and clothes. And that's how the whole journey started. And remember, when I started, people weren't selling clothes. They weren't selling shoes. They weren't doing any of those things.
Right.
You know? And so I was able to not pull from my environment. I was able to pull from my spirit, and my environment pulled from me.
That
You know,
still pulling to this day.
so yeah, that was a big part, and I just love for people to know that, so people understand like it's
That's
all
powerful,
it's a
bro.
mindset.
That's powerful right there.
Yeah.
That I'm glad you took us through that journey of that, because I think that's going to be one of those clips right there that inspires. Nothing else from this episode is taken.
Yeah.
It's that.
Yeah.
That's a great reference point right there, because again, that idea of listening to that voice that's telling you to do something that could put you in position,
yeah,
and not hushing it,
right,
because of that fear,
right,
and,
right,
yeah. And it's interesting how you did touch on getting to the space of speaking when it was redirecting you, because that wasn't a thought back then, but it's all. And what I was going to mention earlier was that how many people you have conversations with that are doing something, and you ask them about, oh, how did you know you would be, did you always want to do this? Did you know you would be doing this?
Yeah.
And it's typically like, no, I was doing this over here, and then boot, doot, 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 and now this, and it's been great.
Yeah.
And I think that's, dude, that idea, you don't necessarily know what the calling is. It will be placed in front of you if you're listening, right?
That's
if you're listening and pay attention to what's being laid out before you. And again, I've been rocking with you for a good long while, and I've talked to you off air about just seeing the progression, right? Yeah. Seeing you hit your stride. Not that it was ever a wobbler,
right?
But seeing this, and even with you having that moment and not having the fear, I know a different confidence in you. I've got to experience a different level of confidence in you. Right. And it's not so much of a posturing thing. It's a way in which the conversation goes.
Right.
Very directed and pointed when you're speaking, because you're not pulling from, these are the mantras. These are the things that are going through the head regularly. Right. You know, and I just in being able to identify with that, because again, me talking about journaling and write, it's like a lot of these things are thoughts that have been written out. And it's a bit easier when you actually believe and understand the things in which you're talking about. And so, again, watching that arc, and that's being everything from the relaunch of the brand when we were doing the first go, you know, at this, and then coming with the signature series, and watching how from that, at least for me as an outside observer, I know you had the stuff with the stack and kicks before that with the stack in the box and the gravity, but when you came with that simple signature, I feel like, and then
opened up,
getting to the point that we sitting here talking to y'all.
Right. Yeah, it's you know, it's definitely been an amazing journey, man. But I can't really overemphasize the importance of knowing how to listen, and I think that's where that's a big part of us defining ourselves. You know, you can't underestimate that. It's so important. If you don't know how to listen, life can get complicated. It can get very confusing. You don't know which way to go. You don't have proper guidance. Listening is key, and we don't listen enough. You know, it's one thing that I really noticed about society in general, is that we don't really listen enough. We don't listen to ourselves. We don't listen to our God, our spirit, sometimes our friends or our partners. We have to make a practice, a very intentional practice of hearing things and processing things, paraphrasing things, you know, and implementing things, you know, and coming up with a resolution based off that information. We need to try to listen. I think that the most in alignment, successful, happy people living on their own terms are the best listeners, you know, and that's what people need to understand. I would not have been able to get this far. I don't think anybody that's in alignment would, if they made their own decisions. What's happening with most people, I think, is they're making their own decisions. They're saying things are happening to them. Yeah. But the underlining fact is that they're making their own decisions. They're feeling a thing. They're kind of knowing what's right, knowing where they should be, but they're doing this instead. And then they come back complaining and they say the world is against them. No one's supporting me. No one loves me, or no one's helping me. You know, but the fact is, when you get to that crossroad, you know, do you make your decision, or do you allow the truth to guide you into uncomfortable places? Because making your own decision is easier. For sure. listening to your spirit and your soul when it's telling you to do something uncomfortable or stand up for what you believe in, that's more difficult.
I've learned many a lesson.
But it's important. It's important that people know how to do that and get comfortable and make it part of their everyday mantra in life, because that's the only way you're going to be led to your alignment and your peace on earth, because you can't live at peace without being true to yourself and being in the spaces that allow you to be authentic. Anything that takes away from you authenticity is taking away peace also.
Put a pin in it.
Right.
And another one. Appreciate y'all rocking with us. Again, make sure you share if you like it. If you feel like you got some things to add to this conversation, definitely jump in there. Give us some of your testimony. Bro was sharing some powerfulness here.
Definitely.
So make sure to tap in with that. Share it with your peoples. Get them follows. Hit all them buttons. Do all them things. And with that said, we will bring you another conversation here soon.
And don't forget, we at Calculated Conversation at Gmail, IG at Calculated Conversation, Calculated Conversation on the YouTube. You see we got the wood, the wood words in the back. Just stay in touch. Keep sharing. Please support the movement, and we appreciate everybody that's been showing love and everybody that's shared so far. Peace.
Yes.